Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Today we're going to talk about some of the comments that the judge in the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case has been receiving on the robing room, and I want to pick through those a little bit and just talk a little bit about them. So stay tuned. There is a unique ability in America to vent your feelings about things, and the freedom of speech is such that we have the right to say what's on our minds. But a lot of times we should be very careful about how we express our opinion, particularly when we don't know anything about the subject that is being discussed. Now, if someone asked my opinion about eye surgery or fast breeder nuclear reactors, my opinion would be completely uninformed. I might have an opinion, but it would be uninformed, and it would be functionally useless, particularly in terms of evaluating someone who built a fast breeder nuclear reactor or did eye surgery. And I say that because, to a certain extent, to be able to evaluate someone's competence, you have to know a little something about the subject. So, recently, on a website called The Robing Room, where people go to rate judges, the judge in the Depp case, Penney, I think it is, has been slapped around pretty hard by some of Amber Heard's fans. And some of the comments are they're really beyond the pale. Let's look at one of those now. Absolutely horrendous. The judge appears to have made up her mind before the trial even started. Now, first of all, I don't know how you could ever know that. Looking at the way the courtroom was laid out and how she handled things and how she addressed the lawyers, it looked to me like she was being exactly what she should have been, which is a neutral arbiter of what gets in and what gets out. But of course, our poster goes on. She suppressed crucial information that was deemed admissible in a UK High Court, and she permitted disruptive and childish behavior from the plaintiff throughout the trial. Well, first of all, there is a reason that we don't try cases under English law. It's because we live in America, and American law prevails, and our American rules of evidence prevail. And in this case, the rules of evidence for Virginia are what are important. And the rules of evidence vary from state to state. The rules regarding hearsay in Missouri are a little bit different than they are the rules in Virginia. But the rules are the rules, and the judge is the person who gets to decide the legal questions about whether or not something is admissible. Now, the question of admissibility is always a difficult question, because there will always be something that advocates in favor of admission and always something that militates against it. And it's balancing those that makes a good judge a good judge. So why was the stuff from the UK trial kept out? Because it was irrelevant. That case involved Johnny Depp suing the Sun in England under English law, which is substantially different than American law on the subject of slander and libel and defamation. American law is much different, and the rules are much different, and as a result, the evidence that comes in is much different than would be in a UK court. So the idea that you're criticizing the judge on that simply reflects your lack of understanding about the basic rules that govern cases in the state of Virginia and govern cases generally. Let's move on. She refused to declare a mistrial despite the defense counsel couldn't prove bias. Despite jury fraud, instead bombastically announcing that the defense counsel couldn't prove bias. Well, that's not what happened. What happened was The juror was seated and they had ample opportunity to voir dire him. They saw everything that was on the juror forms, and they knew everything they needed to know to conduct a voir dire. There is a concept called invited error. In other words, where you induce the court to make an error, and then later on, when things don't go well for you, you try to bootstrap that into a reason to reverse the outcome. And that's essentially what the defendants did here. They attempted to use the fact that this juror appears to have some age discrepancy, which there was no age discrepancy. The judge covered that in her order. But more importantly, they didn't show prejudice. Prejudice is not bias. Bias is whether you favor one side or the other. Prejudice is completely different in this context. Prejudice means legal prejudice. You suffered some harm because of an incorrect or errant ruling on the part of the court. They would have to show that the result would have been different if another juror had been seated, and they could not do that. And of course, the reason they couldn't do that is because they acquiesced in having this juror. At the time that this was known, which was right before the case was submitted, as well as from the beginning of the trial, they could have asked to have him replaced with an alternate juror, but they didn't do that. So they waived any right they had to complain about having that juror on the case. It's really a pretty lame argument for them to have made in the first instance. Let's move on to the next criticisms. Most high court judges in England do have some expertise in this area, given its prevalence in the justice system. But a jury of uneducated lay people, woefully ill-equipped to understand, let alone make any ruling on the available evidence. Well, juries don't make rulings on the available evidence. The judge makes the ruling on what the evidence is. The jurors listen to the facts and decide the facts. And that's how it works in England, too, when there's a jury trial. It's just that in England, these trials are judge-made trials. They're judge-tried cases. And as a result of that, since they're judge-tried cases, you don't get the benefit of a jury. That is a unique principle in American jurisprudence where you get a jury in a case like this. They go on to say, additionally, the jury wasn't sequestered during an extremely aggressive pro-debt PR campaign, which is very likely to have caused significant prejudice. Well, first of all, it wasn't a PR campaign. There was a judicial conference that the judge had to go to. She's required to go to it, so they had to pause the trial in the middle. Now, the same public relations gambits that happened, whether or not they were intentional or not, they could have employed the same strategy on their side, but they didn't. And I would say this, when I watched the first part of that trial, particularly with Johnny Depp testifying, I was not impressed. I was completely unimpressed by his testimony. He looked like a man stumbling around looking for words to define what happened to him. And I don't know whether that was just a consequence of drug use, or maybe he wasn't well prepared to get up there and testify. But whatever it was, at the end of Depp having testified, if I'd been on that jury, I'd have had a hard time voting for her. What absolutely wrecked Amber Heard's case was her own testimony and the fact that she did such a terrible job of acting during that testimony. And so this is sort of a tone-deaf criticism here. And I know that's a slam against the people on YouTube who made an effort to bring this trial to the public and explain what was going on. But again, you have to understand the way the system works. We have a free press, and a free press can include people on YouTube. So if you don't like it, that's just the way our system works. And then another person had a shorter but equally pithy comment. Very biased and incompetent. Well, first of all, I don't know how in the world you judge whether or not a judge is competent based on not having any legal background. Denied important evidence to be presented during the trial. Yes, that's what judges do. They keep out evidence that is not relevant. There were lots of things that she kept out that benefited Miss Heard. For example, the arrest and eventual dismissal of the domestic violence complaint against her first wife. That didn't come in. And the reason that didn't come in is because it was excluded by the judge. That, and only that, is what a judge does during a trial. They make rulings like that. And there's absolutely nothing that would indicate that this judge is in any way incompetent. And then this was interesting. Nor is forcing a woman to talk about rape on television. Well, I just have to deal with that. When you bring a case into a courtroom, you're bringing it in for the whole world to see. And if you're going to make an allegation that you were raped in some horrific way, you have to tell the jury that. You have to tell everybody in that courtroom that, and it gets put out over the wire. And everybody is going to know. Everybody's going to hear that. And nobody forced her to do that. She filed a counterclaim, which meant that she had the burden of proof on that issue. And she failed in that regard. So I think what I would do, and what I would caution people to do, is to look at this kind of thing very, very closely and to evaluate it from the standpoint of perhaps a judge doing her job, and it generally at the end of the day, no one side got all of its evidence in and no one side kept all of its evidence out. There was a sprinkling of evidence that was admitted on both sides. And some things that Depp tried to get in, he couldn't. Some things that Ms. Heard tried to get in, she couldn't. That's the way trials go. That's the way every trial I've been involved in has gone. And that's the way it should go. So that's my take on this assault on the judge by a bunch of people who know nothing. And I would encourage people to not go to that site and say good things about the judge, because it just starts looking like a popularity contest. And that's not what it's for. That site is out there for people who've actually had interactions with the judge, not for people who watch them on TV or YouTube. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments down below. If you haven't already, please go over here and subscribe to our channel so that you can be notified whenever we release a video here. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching and have a terrific day.